Welcome to Trudge the Road from recoveryforlifechannel.com. We're your hosts. I'm Rich, a recovered drug addict.
And I'm Jerry, sober alcoholic.
Coming up in the show, we're going to talk to Sandy. Sandy's an alcoholic. We will also talk a little bit about dry drunks.
Ooh.
And how that ties into emotional maturity. Plus, Dr. Joe is going to join us.
He's going to talk about the prescription drug epidemic, and we certainly do have one in our hands in this country.
Absolutely. This first segment, though, the difference between an addicted person and a non-addicted person. Am I an addicted person or am I a non-addicted person? What does my future hold? Can I go out and have a drink and not worry about getting caught up in an addiction cycle, or am I just somebody that's able to go out and have a good time?
Well, first, recognize the fact that this is a disease. Addiction is a disease, has been recognized by the AMA since the mid-50s as a disease. And the fact of the matter is we, as addicted people, an alcoholic or drug addict, bodily and mentally, we are different. And for the alcoholic, alcohol, for me, it made me feel complete. It made me able to fit in with other human beings. It was an answer to all of my problems. It was a solution. The non-alcoholic, they just like it. They just like it. The effects of alcohol are solutions to all of my problems. For example, I can't make the car payment. Well, the non-addicted person probably would take some measures to solve that problem, maybe get another job, call the credit company and see if they can make a payment late or something of that nature. Not me. My solution to that is to have 2 beers and 2 shots because it ain't a problem anymore after that. It is a solution to my problem. The non-addicted person never looks at alcohol as being a solution to anything. They just like it. Now, in my own behavior being bodily different, and this is an absolute, I'm not exaggerating this whatsoever. Back in my drinking career, I had this car. It was I think it was a Chevy Vega. You remember the Vegas?
Sure do.
All right. Now, where in the engine, there is a compartment which holds the windshield wiper fluid. You know where I'm talking about in the
Sure.
car, all right?
Well, I know the engine of a Vega. That's right where it sucks all the oil like a sieve. Yeah.
Same thing.
Pretty
same
familiar,
thing.
yeah.
Well, what I did was I took the windshield wiper, the reservoir for the windshield wiper fluid, I cleaned it out the best I could, and I filled it with vodka. And then I took the hose, which was pointing up to the windshield, and pulled it into the car. So I could just drive down the street, take a coffee cup, stick it down by where the emergency brake was, hit wash, and get a shot of hot motor vodka. You see.
You should have put a patent on that, because I'll tell you, I have had many conversations with people about somehow inventing an instant bong in the car as well, where you could actually light something and smoke it while you were driving.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you, not on this episode, but on a future Trudge the Road, I'm gonna tell you about a guy who turned a car into a bong. All right, that's coming up. But here's now the example of my behavior, and this is the exact truth. I remember Regina and I were going out on a date, and I have her in this Chevy Vega, and we're going to a bar. We're going to go out and have a couple of drinks, meet with some other people, and we pull up to the stoplight, and I take out this coffee cup, hit wash, and fill up this coffee cup with vodka, and she looks at me and goes, What are you doing? I'm having a cup of motor vodka. Would you like one? And I will never forget the look on her face as she, looked at me and said, dude, you have got a problem. And I said, problem? I got this thing licked. What do you mean problem? This is great. See how I'm thinking? All right. Now we get to the bar. Now I've been drinking on the way to the bar. At the bar, I drink 4 times as much as anybody else, and I'm the only one who is not drunk. Am I telling anybody else's story out there? Can you relate to that? Bodily, we are different. Now I'm going to take you years ahead. I was sober at the time, I think 5 or 6 years, right around there. And I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. And the University of Louisville School of Medicine Department of Psychiatry was doing a study on alcoholics, and they needed some street drunks. Basically, they were looking for level C, class 10 alcoholics, street drunks, those of us who had ended up, as I did, living in a tree in Louisville, Kentucky. But by this time, not only was I clean and sober, but I was a chemical dependency counselor. And so they called me in, and my sponsor, who by trade is a physician, said, you need to do this because they're going to give you the physical that money can't buy. They're going to check you out left and right, and that's a tremendous advantage. So do this. So I did it, and if I'd have known what I was going to have to go through for that physical, I'd have never done it.
Right.
Not to mention the fact it's a medical school. There's always 25 people in the room while you're standing there naked. You know what I'm talking about? It's terrible. But anyway, regardless of that, got the whole physical aspect of it done. Then came time for the questionnaire, and the questionnaire was my drinking and drug history. And I gave it complete honesty of exactly what I did, when I did it, how much, and the preferred drug of choice at the time. That was given to the psychiatrist who was chair of the department, who fired me because I was a liar. I said, I haven't even had a chance to lie yet. I do it real well, but I haven't even had a chance. And he said these exact words: this drinking and drug history of yours is a lie, because nobody can do that. It is physically impossible for a human being to survive that much alcohol and those many drugs. It's impossible. You are doing a lethal amount of drugs and alcohol every day. You're lying to me. And we've seen the physical, your liver and your lungs should look like Swiss cheese, and they don't. So you're a liar. And fine, do I still get my money? And my sponsor then intervened at that point and had to tell him that indeed he's not lying. If anything, he's diluting how much he did. That
Underestimating.
is exactly. And the fact of the matter is that I was doing a lethal amount of alcohol and drugs on a daily basis and survived. Now, at the conclusion of this study that they were doing, I was client 2497, no names were referred to. He called me this. He called me a machine built to drink, that I was a machine built to drink. And that's very inaccurate, because what I am is a miracle. That is living proof of a miracle. I have defied medical science to the utmost. According to their statistics, and they're the best, I should be dead. And here I am, not only alive, but healthy. And that isn't anything. I'm not a machine built to drink. I'm a living miracle. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. And the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual path to living, as opposed to the intellectual path we were using. In other words, my best thinking. My best thinking is what's got me here. Look at my record, look at my record, look at my record. And it's very, very hard to get rid of that. Very, very hard to change. And I think a lot of that is where the third step of Alcoholics Anonymous comes in. And that's turning my will and my life over to the care of God as I choose to understand Him. And what does that mean? And how important is it? It's absolutely vital. And I'm going to give you this example. You know what a Rubiks Cube is?
Sure.
Okay? All right, you're looking at a Rubiks Cube right now. One side is your finances, one side is relationships, one side is career, one side is family, and they're all supposed to be matched up perfectly like a Rubiks Cube, all right? If you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, how does yours look?
Well, mine's all messed up.
Yeah, exactly. It is all, but that's okay. You've done the best you could. That is what got you here. That is the intellectual path that we took, and those are the results. You're looking at it at that Rubik's Cube. It's absolutely a mess.
Well, I love the analogy, because if you take a Rubik's Cube and you look at it as if it is an addicted person, you actually, to get all 4 sides again, or 6 sides, how many sides is it? 8 sides, whatever. You try to get all sides on the same color. That's the effort that you have to put into getting your life back on track as well.
And that effort is really simple. It's one thing. It's turn it over. It's to take that Rubik's Cube, that mess, and hand it to God as you choose to understand Him, the God that you met in the second step. It's an act of faith. It's an act of trust. And you take all of those big things, your finances, your relationship, family, career, and turn it over to Him, and you walk away. You walk away and you simply do the next right thing, because we cannot think our way into good behavior. We have to act our way into good thinking. And that means we start small. Make your bed, get a job, go to work, pay your bills. Those basic things for us that are just counterintuitive because we don't like them. We don't want them. And we learn over again. And then trusting God to take care of those big things, all the finances, the family, the career. How often does He take care of it? How often does that Rubik's Cube come back to you in perfect order? 100% of the time. And you need proof of it? You simply walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and ask, and you will see it over and over and over again. Everybody who has done that has had great success at it, the reciprocation of God who loves you. What's wonderful for me in my recovery is to have learned and been gifted so often with the coping mechanisms to be able to handle situations which used to baffle me before. And I give complete credit to my higher power, which I choose to call God, for being able to intervene in those situations where I'm just overwhelmed and will make a bad decision and help me through that. And again, it kind of goes back to that third step where we're turning our will and our lives, our thinking and our actions, if you will, over to this power called God in my particular case, who is my Father and who loves me unconditionally and has no expectations on me, just wants me to be happy, healthy, and to prosper. Nothing more than that. Living successful lives via the 12 steps. Remember, we've taken a spiritual path now as opposed to the intellectual path because that didn't work.
This is Trudge the Road from the recoveryforlifechannel.com. And you can catch us on Twitter. We're at RFL Channel. And we're also on Facebook at Recovery for Life Channel. Coming up, Sandy. She's an alcoholic. You're going to be talking to her. Plus, we're going to be talking about dry drunks and emotional maturity. We're going to touch on that again. Plus, Dr. Joe coming up. This is Trudge the Road.
You're listening to Trudge the Road. Coming up, Jerry talks with Sandy, a 5-year sober alcoholic. And later, Rich and Jerry will discuss a dry drunk and taking your emotional inventory. It's all on the way on the Trudge the Road Radio Network.
Welcome back to Trudge the Road from the recoveryforlifechannel.com. My guest is Sandy. Friend of mine, Sandy, thank you very much for coming by. I appreciate that.
Thanks for asking me to come over.
Just to kind of qualify, myself in regards to your issue as an alcoholic beforehand, and I need to say this, is that I do not know what it's like for a woman to get sober. I do know this. It's more difficult than it is for a man. And I'll give you, an example. Just by demographics, within the recovering community, I can walk into any clubhouse and find a lot of men with long-term recovery. Not necessarily the case with women. There are not as many. And thank God that you're here with some time under your belt to be able to help someone else. And the other thing is being labeled sociologically. Being labeled a bad dad. Okay, that's bad. A bad father, that's bad. But it ain't being labeled a bad mother. That carries a lot of weight to it, and a lot of emotional damage can be done to the person suffering from the disease and, of course, our families. Your story is one full of miracles and full of struggles. But let's go back to the beginning and find out a little bit about, how alcohol worked for you the first time.
Well, I started drinking to fit in, square peg in a round hole, and I just wanted to shrink and disappear from Earth. And alcohol did that for me. I could just blend in and be invisible. And then when I had enough alcohol, then I felt like I fit right in and I could just jump in and fit in anywhere that I was. So, but that started when I was about 15. I would come home from school and disappear and have some drinks and listen to my music. Mm-hmm. And, all the other people were out involved in sports and all that kind of thing. But, I was real comfortable just being by myself with my alcohol.
What about now, your life within the family, your sociology within family? How were you doing in school? How were you performing basically in life at this stage at 15?
Well, I was very codependent in that I had to make sure everybody around me was happy. Mm-hmm. So I appeared like I fit into the family structure really well. I was the perfect little daughter. My grades were okay. It was more just a escape mechanism from a very, very early time.
Really, from the beginning, would you qualify it as an escape mechanism?
Yeah, I would.
As a solution to the problem you didn't know you had.
Right. I didn't know why I was unhappy. I was just unhappy. Very depressed and unhappy.
And alcohol was the solution to that.
It was the solution.
Continue your story. Tell us where that took you.
When I went to college, I was, just a party animal, drank all the time. Never really had any serious relationships with anyone. Friends came and went. I just did and as long as I had somebody to party with, then I felt like I was okay. And then I went through college and ended up dating somebody that I grew up with, and he partied hardy. And so we had a lot of fun partying, eventually got married. And then I wanted to be done with the partying. Mm-hmm. And, he didn't, but we had a family, and I got a job, and the drinking just became kind of a weekend warrior kind of thing.
Right.
I always prided myself in being a good mother. And that the kids came first and that kind of thing. But I was never really happy. I was always just thinking about when this would be over. And I never could quite understand why I continued to be depressed. I was always depressed, and the drink would help.
I'm going to make the assumption that you weren't considering this issue that you had at this point, alcoholism, maybe depression or, something of that nature. When did you begin to seek some advice or help for the way that you felt?
Off and on throughout, for years, off and on, I would go to the doctor and tell him how unhappy I was, how awful I felt. I went through a period of time where I had panic attacks like daily, and the doctor always kept telling me, well, if you just go out and exercise and essentially pull myself up by my bootstraps, I would be fine. So I was drinking a lot, and I went to the doctor the one day and I said, I really need some help. I'm drinking a lot. And his recommendation was that I go to Curves and lose some weight, and then I'd be happy and I wouldn't drink. So I, said, oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem. I'm fat, And, so I continued to drink for 4 more years after that situation.
I'm assuming then that the circumstances and consequences became worse as the disease progressed.
They became worse almost on a daily basis. I could see that I was going further and further down into depression and further into the alcoholism.
Now, at this point, have you addressed it? Have you said, I've got a drinking problem? Have you gone that far?
I had said quite often that I had a drinking problem when I'd wake up with the hangover, when I just couldn't become comfortable with myself. I knew that the alcohol was a problem. I remember telling my husband on more than one occasion, we need to stop drinking. We need to stop drinking. And, it just kind of got brushed aside. And I thought, I probably don't. I'm probably fine. I'm still helping run the family business. I'm still caring for my children. They're going everywhere they need to be. I looked really good at all the school functions. Nobody had a clue that I had any issues and that I was a drinker. Most people just had no clue because I hid it really, really well.
You wore the mask with perfection.
I did.
Wow. All right. Now, what did you do about it? Did you immediately run to Alcoholics Anonymous, or how did you start trying to find a solution?
I did not run immediately to Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not want that stigma. In my mind, Alcoholics Anonymous was the homeless people. I had no real true knowledge.
Just that stereotype was all you had.
I had this stereotype, and that was it. And so I started off with going to the bookstore to try and find books that could help me stop drinking.
The self-help books.
Yes.
Right.
And I found this one that I was supposed to be completely recovered from my alcoholism in 7 weeks. That sounded wonderful.
Sure.
So I bought it, and then I proceeded to buy all the vitamins that it told me to buy. And so I was taking probably 40 to 50 vitamins a day, and these would cure my alcoholism. Continued to drink with the vitamins, and it was quite an interesting experience, but, this was supposed to work. So needless to say, it did not. So then I went on the internet, and I started looking for other alternatives to try and quit drinking, and found a organization called Women for Sobriety. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is what I need. The closest meeting was about 58 miles away. And I said, can't do that. I'm just supposed to keep on drinking.
Keep on drinking.
So I did that for a while longer. I actually knew that I had to do something when I started drinking with my teenage children. Up until then, I wasn't hurting anybody in my mind. And I was, just still the perfect mom, all the things that I had to be, even though inside I was miserable and
emotionally detached.
Knew I had a real serious problem. So I actually drank with my twin sons and their friends. And the next morning, one of their friends was laying in the yard, and I thought he was dead.
Whoa.
And I went out and tried to wake him, and he wouldn't wake up. And I knew that I had to find a way to get alcohol out of my life.
Are we going to call, is this the bottom?
This was the bottom.
All right. What did you do?
I called Alcoholics Anonymous.
Okay. This is 5-6 years ago?
This was 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us what happened.
A very nice person answered the phone and immediately had a woman call me. And she called me back within minutes. And she said, let's meet at a meeting. And we set up a meeting. And she was there. And she was wonderful. And that started my journey.
So you walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous for the very first time. I'm sure you were very, very scared, what's going to happen here? and what did happen?
There were women. There were like 5 women there. They all greeted me at the door with, "Oh, we're so happy you're here." And they were excited to talk with me and get to know me. And the most important thing that happened in that meeting was they told me that I didn't have to hurt from alcohol anymore, and that they were going to love me until I learned to love myself.
How's that process gone?
It has been amazing. It has been amazing. The women who had told me they were going to love me until I learned to love myself were true to their word. They were there for me through the first horrible months of trying to keep that drink down. Keep that drink out of my hand. Mm-hmm. There was always alcohol in my home, and they were there to pick up the phone when I called to say, I opened the refrigerator and there's beer. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And they were there and answered the phone and just helped take me through those first really crucial months and are still there.
And you're with them now, because I've witnessed it myself, you helping others as they come through the door, and how you do stick together and have that innate understanding, that understanding of the pain that we experience. Now, folks out there who don't have this disease don't know it, and that's great. I'm glad you don't, but we do. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to define that pain, but you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about.
And that's why so much of AA works is we understand that pain. We understand the pain that we all suffer, and that makes it so much easier to communicate. And you do that so well in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, over the last few years, there's been a lot of miracles. There's been a lot of struggles, but you're doing well. Tell us a little bit about your life in recovery.
Since I came into recovery, I've secured the job of my dream. I had always wanted to get back into my chosen profession from college, and I was offered a job that I never even applied for. And it was exactly the job that I had always wanted. And I've been at that job almost 4 years now, and it's just been amazing. So that was a gift from my higher power, who I choose to call God. And I knew that and recognized it for what it was right when it happened.
Back to to God, to the fact that this is a spiritual program. Tell us a little bit, if you could, about that relationship that you've learned through AA to have with God as you choose to understand Him.
Well, just for a little background information, I always struggled with religion from the time I was very young, and I always believed there was a God, but I couldn't find a religion that I was comfortable in. Mm-hmm. And when I came into AA and I learned that it's God of my understanding, the doors just opened. And I have an amazing relationship with my higher power today. I know that I'm never alone. He is always with me. And that's what I always wanted in my life, was to not feel alone, to not feel like that square peg trying to fit in the round hole. And with AA and with the God of my understanding, I have that now. I can, as long as I let go and let God straighten out that Rubiks Cube that you talk about, Jerry, as long as I let go and let Him work on that Rubiks Cube, my life has been really amazing. Now, there are some downs.
Sure. It's life on life's terms.
And I fight life on life's terms upon occasion, but I know the only thing I have to do perfectly today is not pick up a drink.
You've done a great job, and you've brought us full circle. Your sharing today was magnificent. I can't thank you enough for coming by, and I hope that you'll do it again.
Thank you, Jerry.
That is Sandy. Thank you so very much. You're listening to Trudge the Road, brought to you by the recoveryforlifechannel.com.
You're listening to Trudge the Road. Coming up next, Rich and Jerry discuss a dry drunk and taking your emotional inventory. And later, Dr. Joe will join us to talk about the abuse of prescription pills. It's all on the way on the Trudge the Road Radio Network.
Welcome to Trudge the Road from recoveryforlifechannel.com. We're your hosts. I'm Rich, a recovered drug addict.
Jerry here, sober alcoholic.
And if we could, can you define dry drunk?
It's hard to define. It encompasses a lot. You know, there's the typical within the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, when you're dry, you're not working your program. And what that means is basically that you are emotionally and behaviorally functioning as if there were alcohol on board, when indeed there isn't. It's a horrible place to be. There's also something called post-acute withdrawal. Now, Dr. McCauley would really have to explain that, but that's commonplace in those first 18 months, 24 months of recovery, and that's part of that behavior of getting better. But that has to do with our body. Now, there are friends of mine, seriously, who are sober 20 years, and you don't take a match to them because, poof, they'll blow. And they just haven't had I just haven't drunk in 20 years. I haven't had a drink, and I'm fine, thank you. No, you're not. You know, miserable, irritable, discontent. That's what I am if I don't have alcohol in my system and nothing else there to replace it. Because now I'm back to living on that intellectual path. When I live on that intellectual path, I'm a goner. Look at my record, look at my record, look at my record. It's my best thinking that got me here. If you lead the spiritual path, which are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're never going to have a dry drunk, because you're leading there's a different solution to the problems in your life. This one is spiritual, and it works.
Well, we talk about when you finally, let's say you started drinking when you were 14, you quit drinking when you're 35, your emotional level is that of a 14-year-old.
Exactly. And as we said earlier in the program, and it is part of the pathology of the disease, every one of us, every addict, every drug addict and alcoholic is immature and a perfectionist. Every single one of us. And that's what makes life so difficult. When you're a perfectionist, it's not that you're failing at anything. It's just that you can't get everything perfect, so you just don't do it. And you just don't do it. That's the reaction of a child. See the immaturity and the perfectionism, how they collide and cause all kinds of problems for us trying to live life on life's terms.
Well, these are a couple of examples of things that change when you find yourself finally getting sober, finally getting in recovery, and finally connecting with the recovery community. You're able to accept criticism gracefully.
It's a matter of sensitivity, you know, and as we've said before, you know, we've got some good news for you and some bad news if you're an alcoholic. The good news is you're extremely sensitive. The bad news is you're extremely sensitive, you know.
And we're all sensitive.
Exactly. But us to a point where we can hear, you know, I think you could do that a different way. We don't hear that. We hear, you're stupid.
Right.
You don't know what you're doing. You know, that's part of, again, being an alcoholic, is hearing things that just aren't there and taking them for reality and reacting inappropriately.
Sure. You can look at it as an opportunity to improve yourself as opposed to you're under attack.
Exactly. And that's how we view everything, under attack, and it's not the case. And today, within recovery, I can take criticism and from it grow and make my life better.
And I don't expect special consideration from anyone anymore. Whereas before, I always thought that I should be special. You know, I was not aware of my surroundings. I was never completely aware of my surroundings. You know, I was so insulated. It was so much about me, that I didn't consider your feelings. I didn't consider Matt's feelings over there, our producer. I wouldn't have considered Sandy's feelings. It would be about Rich's feelings, all about me. Whereas now I'm in a position where, or at least in a thought process or a place in life where I consider everyone's feelings, and sometimes to a fault where I'll consider other feelings before I'll consider my own.
You know, we've been defined as egotistical maniacs with gigantic inferiority complexes. And that's really true. And that's just exactly what you described. A gigantic ego with an inferiority complex, that perfectionism clashing against that level of immaturity and disaster coming from it.
I think also now able to accept responsibility without making alibis up. You know, no longer am I, well, what about there, or trying to deflect blame. Now I will take responsibility. If it's my fault, I did it. I deal with the consequences, where before I was so deflective. No, it's not my fault. What are you talking about? It's their fault over there. They're the ones. I didn't do anything wrong.
That's right. And we become experts at blaming. Now, if you're a significant other, if you have an alcoholic or drug addict in your life, be it a spouse, child, whatever, you'll probably feel that way that we make you feel guilty and that we make you feel responsible for all of the ills in our life. Again, that's part of that pathology that we develop.
Another thing that I've stopped doing, showing off or boasting in unacceptable social situations.
Dig me.
I can go back and tell you that when I was out there, there were several times when I would find myself in some social circle where I would behave inappropriately by boasting or talking out of turn or over someone. And, you know, in my sober life now, I'm reflective. I'm very reflective. And I've told you this before. I'm very reflective of things that I've said to someone or things that I've done in the past. I don't dwell on it. It's not something that I keep going back and trying to surface those feelings of embarrassment or humiliation. But I'm very cognizant of it. And when I do go back and I do reflect upon certain situations in which I behaved poorly, I grasp onto that and I make a conscious note. Going forward, I will never allow myself to act or behave in that manner again.
You know, I got to bring up the 6th and 7th step in regards to that, you know, because that's where such a miracle takes place in how we deal with those issues and the embarrassment and the fear and the calamity of our drinking lives. It's at that 6th and 7th step where it never can hurt you again. It can never affect you negatively again because it changes. It becomes your experience. This is what you use now to help the next alcoholic who walks through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And that's great.
I find pure joy in watching others succeed. I would never feel that before. I would feel a sense of jealousy if someone else was doing well and I wasn't doing well. And the reason I wasn't doing well is because I was strung out on crystal meth. But now, you know, in sober life, when I see someone truly succeed or somebody get something good,
it makes you happy.
It makes me happy. I'm happy for that person. I couldn't feel for anyone back then.
No, and that's proof that the promises of the program are coming true in your life. And where do they come true? In the 9th step. You know, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. And this is the only advice I ever give. Don't stop at amazed. That's where we lose everybody. It's at 1, 2, 3. They take those first 3 steps. The bills start getting paid. Relationships start getting better. Things smooth out a little bit. I'm amazed that this is working out so well. And we stop. But again, look at the promises. You'll be amazed before you're halfway through. You've yet to realize the miracle. The promises come true in the 9th step. Look it up in the book.
Something else that you and I have discussed before. Patience. Zero patience.
I want it now.
Exactly. And I still struggle with that to this day. I mean, I think that I've learned a lot of patience at reasonable delays. You know, if something is reasonable to me, again, I am open now to discussion, whereas before, I don't want to hear it. I want to know why it's not done now. You know, now I'm a little more open to things, and patience is something I've had to learn because I had zero patience.
It is. Patience is a learned attribute. It's, you know, in our particular case, and I thank the good Lord for maybe giving me a little of it, but they're cautious about praying for patience around here because if you pray for patience, God will give you the opportunity to learn it. You know, and it'll usually be at the line at the bank or, you know, or at the Department of Transportation, someplace where you're going to stand and learn about being patient, you know, and I pray in places like that. That's where I use opportunity to communicate with God as I choose to understand Him. I'm stuck in the line at the supermarket. It's time for me to be able to do that. It gives me that opportunity.
Great analogy. Supermarket. Standing in line. I always choose the wrong line.
I do too. It's inevitable. I don't know why, but it's just a magnet. I go right to the slowest one. every time.
Well, it's, there'll be 2 people in that line. There'll be 5 people in the other. I'll go to the 2-person line. But the guy in front's writing a check, but he can't find his checkbook, and then the pen doesn't work. And
my driver's license is in the car.
I look over to my left, and this line's done. I'm still standing there. But in situations before where I would
be angry.
Oh, I would be so angry. Cop an attitude. By the time I get up there, it's the cashier's fault.
Oh, yeah. Just think of the abuse those poor folks have to take from folks like us.
I saw it this morning. I got my oil changed, and one guy was having a little trouble at the place where I got it changed. The guy behind the counter was having trouble coming up with the paperwork, and it's because the machine, they had those machines with the, what is that called? The dot matrix?
Yeah, the old ones, yeah.
And the paper got jammed on it.
Yeah,
you should have seen this guy was just coming down on him hard. Come on, I gotta go. And I thought to myself, that was me. That was me a while ago, because I had places to go. I had dope to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So patience is something that we all learn, and whether you're addicted or you're not addicted, patience is always different for everyone. But for me, it's something that I've definitely mastered a lot better. The all or nothing stage.
Ooh. That's perfectionism again.
Yeah, it's I'm either all in or I'm not in at all.
Right.
And that is something I think once we are no longer the center of the universe in our own heads, we're able to step back and be able to compromise a little bit.
Even on a simple level. I mean, just this weekend, I needed to clean my apartment, but I wanted the whole thing all done and complete. Wasn't satisfied with just getting the kitchen done, and working on this part later. It's all got to be done. It's all got to be perfect. It's all got to be done right now.
I think what we've touched on here is quite a few behaviors. If you're out there and you are using, take some of those in mind and know that you can change those behaviors. Maybe it's difficult to look at yourself right now and really get a grasp of what we're talking about. But if you are out of it, you can look back and you can reflect and you can see that you have grown as a person. And one of the great ways to get yourself in these life lessons is to get yourself to a meeting.
Absolutely. Again, we'll emphasize this is a disease. Come to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, ask some questions, meet some people, see if that's where you belong, and join us on this remarkable recovery that we have one day at a time, and the future is just unlimited.
Dr. Joe's coming up. This is Trudge the Road from recoveryforlifechannel.com.
You're listening to Trudge the Road. Coming up next, Dr. Joe sits down with Jerry to discuss the prescription pill epidemic in this country. It's on the way next on the Trudge the Road Radio Network.
Welcome back to Trudge the Road from the recoveryforlifechannel.com. I'm Jerry, and with me is our resident professional, Dr. Joseph McCauley. Dr. Joe, thank you very much for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for all that you've done for us in the previous episodes. I think that you've really given a lot of folks a lot of hope and a lot of help, and we really, really appreciate all of your expertise.
No, thank you.
When we talk about being a drug addict, you think of the heroin, cocaine, meth, things of that nature. But in reality, the big culprit in regards to the substance, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me, is prescription drugs.
Well, definitely. Prescription drugs have really taken off since the 1990s. Before, back in the 70s and that sort of thing, there were things like Quaaludes and there were pills. There's always been pills, but those sorts of things really were not quite as lethal as what we're finding with what is now the synthetic opiate boom. And if you look in the medical literature, what you're seeing now is that the rates of death and morbidity and emergency room visits and all these sorts of healthcare related sorts of things are going up exponentially with regard to synthetic opiates, which would be like oxycodones and those types of drugs that are not heroin, but they're synthetic. In other words, drug companies can make them for as a painkiller, and they're readily available. They're highly prescribed. I think I was reading today that there was something like 1 million prescriptions for oxycodone written in Florida last year or something like that. I mean, it's incredible. There's just an incredible flood into the marketplace. Now, what's happened is that they've also found that younger and younger people are getting a hold of these drugs, and once they start using, then they continue to increase their use. And of course, then that becomes sort of a gateway for even heavier drug use, such as heroin and that sort of thing. The problem with prescription opiates is that they're generally expensive once they hit the street. And then once people run out of money, which addicts typically do, then they have to turn to a less expensive alternative, which might be street drugs, heroin, that sort of thing, which becomes increasingly lethal. Now, don't get me wrong, the synthetic opiates are lethal in and of themselves. What happens is typically a young kid will start taking oxycodone or some tablet that they found in their parents' bathroom or that they were able to get from other kids at school and that sort of thing. Then after they have been using that for a while, then they'll start snorting it. And then after they start snorting it, then they will move to a higher level of either dosage or a more potent synthetic opiate. And then, as I state, they'll eventually run out of money, and then they'll start getting into heroin. Now, the statistic that I really want everybody to hear is that if you become a street heroin user, your morbidity and mortality is 64 times greater than the general population.
64 times.
64 times. That's not like 2 times. That's not like 3 times. It's 64 times. And so once you get into street heroin, basically you're almost signing your death certificate. Something bad is going to happen to you. Either you're going to overdose, which is the most likely thing, or you're going to get associated IV drug-related diseases such as hepatitis C or HIV or things like that. Almost for sure you're going to have a criminal record. All kinds of bad things are just going to start happening to you. But, of course, the worst thing is that you're going to overdose and die.
64 times.
64 times.
That's just absolutely phenomenal. Now, let me ask you this. A heroin addict, if I am a heroin addict and I have my choice between taking the street drug, the heroin, or if somebody has the oxycodone, I'm going to go for the oxycodone because I know what that is, correct?
That's sort of the myth in a way. In a way, it's safer because you know what you're getting. On the other hand, you can still overdose and die from taking the oxycodone.
Right.
The problem is that if you look at the statistics, generally speaking, people don't just die from oxycodone. What they eventually end up doing is they're mixing drugs, alcohol, everything else with it, and then they stop breathing and die.
All right, let me talk about now the physicians. And I know that in your training, I know many physicians, and one of your first things is get you out of pain. You don't want anybody to hurt. You don't want people to suffer. But then again, it's obvious, too, that you as a community, the medical community, number one, is being used by people like you and I. And I've worked in emergency psych. I've seen the frequent flyers who come in, specifically looking just for drugs. And then on the other side, too, of physicians, there's the business of writing scripts.
Absolutely. And as happened, I think this past week, there was a physician in California who was indicted for second-degree murder on a couple of counts of people who died because this particular physician had written synthetic opiate scripts rather indiscriminately, and there were people who died from overdosing on those particular pills. Now, if you talk to anybody who's been to Florida, California, a lot of different places where they have not yet cracked down on these opiate mills, there are a lot of places, and of course all the drug addicts know where they are, where they can just go in, have a physician write a prescription for X number of hydrocodone, oxycodones, whatever, and there's really no other exam done. It's really not medicinal. So you've got bad doctors on one hand. You've got people who are addicts who are going to find drugs wherever they can find them. And then on the other hand, you have another whole set of doctors who are really somewhat naive to this whole problem. And we're attempting to try to educate doctors about this in terms of looking at functionality in addition to pain scores. In other words, it's easy if you go to talk to somebody who says that they're in pain, they might tell you, well, I'm at a 10 out of 10 or I'm an 8 out of 10.
Right.
Well, if they're smiling at you and they're walking around casually and that sort of thing, then their functionality and their report of a pain level may not jive.
Be exaggerated.
You could say that. And so, again, one of the things that we're trying to teach healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, anybody else that's in the business of having to deal with pain patients and that sort of thing, is to look out for certain traits, certain red flags, if you will, about the consistency of people's complaints versus their reported pain scores. The Joint Commission for the Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations, JACO, basically has said that pain is a vital sign, more or less. In other words, we really need to monitor people's pain, and that there are a lot of people who have undertreated pain. There is no doubt about that. Again, this is, from an addict standpoint, a wonderful thing, because they can play on that whole need for treating people's pain and say, well, look, you have to treat my pain. But again, what I'm saying is that sophisticated medical professionals and people who are trained to look for these red flags that I was telling you about can begin to just say no in an appropriate way without feeling like they're leaving somebody in the lurch.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming, and I'll ask you as a doctor, that are the pharmaceutical companies doing, something in regards to non-narcotic pain relief? Is there something, that is coming soon that will bring us the opportunity not to have to suffer and not to, of course, use a narcotic?
Well, there is no substitute for narcotics at this particular time, unfortunately, in terms of really substantive pain relief. There's plenty of other things, though, that can be done to relieve people's pain. They've done studies at the London Pain Clinic and places like that where they've shown that if you do other modalities such as physical therapy, warm baths, acupuncture, all these sorts of things that would be considered sort of non-conventional or not whatever, that you can generally take care of most people's pain. And one of the things that when I used to work in addiction full time and that sort of thing is we'd have people that came in that were on heavy duty opiate pain medicines because they had, for instance, a failed back. But then once they got off of their medicines, they found out, well, my pain's really not that bad. But they were habituated to the opiates. They were also afraid that once the opiates were going to be withdrawn, that they were just going to suffer. And it turns out that's really not the case. The other thing that I really want to say is that the therapeutic dose for opiates is pretty minimal in a way, in that if you get somebody up to 120 milligrams, say, of oxycodone a day or something like that, if you push them up to 200 milligrams, 300 milligrams, 400 milligrams, you're really not going to help their pain any more than the 120 milligrams did. And so this is one of the things that doctors also get caught up in from time to time, where someone will develop some tolerance and they'll continue to increase the dose. But in fact, they're really not actually making appreciable changes in the person's pain levels or pain scores.
Now, with people like me, addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics, and in my own particular recovery, the question has been asked of me when pain medication was a possibility by my sponsor, who by trade is also a physician, but he's not my doctor, he's my sponsor, asked me this question: what's worse, the fear or the pain? And I think applicable to us, that's the first thing I'm going to treat is that fear. And I'll give you an example and ask you to delve a little bit maybe into your own spirituality, which I know that a number of years ago I cut my finger off playing racquetball. I won't get into the story how that happened, but it did. And as you can see, they got it back on. But at the hospital, I was petrified, obviously. But whatever numbing agent they give, I felt nothing. I literally felt nothing in my finger. And that was when my sponsor announced that this man needs no pain medication. And what do you mean I don't need any pain medication? And he said, you're petrified, you're scared, I'm going to talk to you. You're not in any pain, you don't feel anything in that finger. And he was right. After the hand surgeon came in and repaired my finger, they did give me a heavy-duty narcotic. Being still was very important Of course, my sponsor immediately notified the AA police who were waiting for me at the house to make sure I didn't enjoy 1 second of that drug, But this is what happened to me, Doc, and is that, as you know, we talk about a conscious contact with God as we choose to understand Him, and I have a conscious contact. It's palatable. It's a feeling that is as real as you sitting across from me. And when I was under the influence of that narcotic, there was a wall up. I could not make that. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't, and it was frightening. It was frightening. The next morning when I woke up and the medicine had worn off, it was back. It was fine. But that will never leave my head. That moment that all of a sudden he wasn't there. There was a wall. It was blocked.
Well, and I would just like to say two things to what. First of all, I'm glad your finger's back. But the second thing is just that it's important for physicians and nurses and people in the medical profession to realize addiction as a disease, and that when people are given opiates and mood-altering substances and that sort of thing, they're basically triggering that part of the brain that will get people back into their addictive state. However, having said that, I want to be very clear that people with addiction need to be properly treated for pain. In other words, as long as you needed to be treated for the pain in your finger, in other words, whether it was from a nerve block, which worked fine, or after the nerve block wore off, if they needed to give you opiates, that's fine. It's just that you were fortunate and you were in the 1% of addicted people who had somebody there with you who would then monitor you afterwards to say, look, we really need to get these opiates away from you as quickly as possible. You need to understand that you're sort of in relapse mode and that we need to be sort of intensive about getting you back into your recovery program. That doesn't happen for most people, unfortunately. And so it's very important for physicians, people in AA, people in recovery to understand that just like you wouldn't leave a diabetic after surgery and say, well, have a nice day and we're not going to monitor your sugars.
Right.
The same thing happens with those dopamine levels in an addict's brain. We want you to be treated for your pain. We want you to be adequately treated for your pain. We don't want to be in this gamesmanship where we're going to withhold this pain medicine because you're an addict or something along those lines. What we want to have happen is you be treated, but recognize that you're probably going to be a little bit dysregulated. You're probably going to be craving. You're probably going to be in a sort of a dangerous area, so to speak, in terms of your recovery. But if the recovering community and the sponsor and their friends and all those people will recognize that, then they can surround that addict who has had to be put under the influence to basically make their transition back into full recovery.
And we do that all the time, and especially as the baby boomers, there's a little more knee replacements here and hips there and backs and things of that nature. So it does happen, and we do see it all the time, and it is successfully brought to conclusion and people back to good health.
Absolutely.
But it can be real tricky and real dangerous.
Definitely. And again, one of the things that we used to give people when I was working full-time in addictions was a sheet that said, if you have addiction and you need surgery, this is what you need to do. And again, it sort of followed the outline that I just went over. You need to be adequately treated, but at the same time, it's very important that you not be taking the medications any longer than you have to. And again, you're going to want to take them longer than you have to. You need somebody to be there as a sponsor or as somebody that's watching you and that sort of thing. And we need to intensively watch you after this is all over.
As we say in the rooms, or advise in the rooms, I shouldn't say advise, suggest that that when you do, have to make an emergency room visit, or you're meeting a physician for the first time, to use these exact words: "I am a sober alcoholic." Did you find that enough as a physician?
I think that that's very helpful for people who are savvy to addiction. Again, I think unfortunately there's still professionals out there who that still kind of freaks them out, or they don't completely understand what they're dealing with.
I've seen that look. I know that look when you say sober alcoholic. It catches them by surprise.
Right. And again, this all goes back to, I think, why we're doing this program. I would really like for people to understand the distinction between sober addiction, abuse, all these sorts of things that I believe people don't completely understand, and so therefore people get mistreated or misunderstood because of the fact that addiction's not understood as a disease concept.
And I know we're kind of running out of time here, but now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the American Medical Association in the mid-'50s classify alcoholism or addiction as a disease?
It is. And The problem, unfortunately, is that I believe there's like 30 minutes of 4 years of medical school curriculum that's given towards
for the number one disease in America.
And so there's still a lot of education that needs to be done, and hopefully we'll continue to do that.
Well, thank God there's doctors like you here. We really do appreciate it, and obviously we have a lot of work to be done here on Trudge the Road. All right, and we've got the man to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dr. Joseph McCauley. We appreciate it immensely. Your expertise is, we just couldn't be more grateful. Can't express it. Thank you very
Jerry.
much. All right, we'll be back with more of Trudge the Road, brought to you by the recoveryforlifechannel.com.
You've been listening to Trudge the Road. We'd like to thank our sponsor this week, LiveFrogged.com, firmly relying on God's grace every day. That's LiveFrogged.com. Join us next week for Trudge the Road on this great radio station on the Trudge the Road Radio Network.